This show is an extension of Bridget, a confidence coaching service for young women. I'm Asha Gabriel, and I co host this show alongside my best friend and Bridget COO, Kashia Rosenberg. Today, I have a real treat for you all. I am so thrilled for you all to meet Allison Mitchell, the editor in chief of three different modern luxury media publications: Vegas, Modern Luxury Riviera Orange County, and Modern Luxury San Diego. That's right, she is a magazine editor. Teenage me is screaming with excitement. Allison has over 11 years of experience producing luxury focused editorial content for the nation's largest luxury media company. She previously served as the West Coast deputy editor of Modern Luxury Angelino, Modern Luxury Riviera Orange County, and Modern Luxury San Diego magazines. And she started her career with Modern Luxury Media at Atlanta's leading luxury lifestyle magazine, Jezebel. Allison rose from assistant editor to associate editor to deputy editor and finally to editor in chief in under 5 years. And her work has appeared in additional modern luxury media magazines across 22 different markets. So we can all collectively pick our jaws up off the floor in admiration and get excited because we're going to dive into how Allison got to where she is and what she was like before all of this developed. So welcome, Allison Mitchell, to Meet Bridget.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
I mean, I think that I'm probably not alone when I say that I've always been curious about what it is, obviously, like the day to day and everything for a magazine editor, but also like what kind of person is capable of achieving what you've achieved and how it kind of comes together. So I think it's going to be so much fun to really dive into just who you were before all of this came to be. And then also like what got you to persist in a really competitive marketplace. So I'd love to just go back to the beginning and have you paint the picture of who you were as a child and where you grew up.
Sure. So I grew up in San Clemente, California, little beach town near Laguna, and I'm an only child. Mom and dad married for 35 plus years. Went to small Catholic schools from kindergarten through eighth grade. Went to a school called Our Lady of Fatima. That was just like 300 kids, 35 kids in the same grade for 9 years. So I think at a really early age, I was forming really close relationships just because there were like 14 girls to choose from in my class that
Totally.
you were going to be with for the next 9 years. So I loved Our Lady of Fatima. That was a great experience for me. I made friends there that to this day I still have. I'm 34 now, and I've been in my best friend's weddings that I've known since I was 5 years old. My very best friend, Alec, we've known each other since we were four. We went to preschool, middle school, high school, the whole way together. I'm now the godmother of her daughter. So, Our Lady of Fatima really kind of like laid the groundwork, I think, for forming positive female friendships and relationships. And on top of that, my mom at the same time was becoming friends with the mothers of all these girls. So even now, like those moms are kind of like my second mothers, just because we've all known each other for so long. And many of those same girls I then went on to high school with. I went to Santa Margarita Catholic High School out in Rancho Santa Margarita. Little bit bigger, school of like 1,600, about 400 kids in my class, which was bigger than my entire middle school.
Yeah.
So that was like a totally different experience, just going from kind of this really small pool to what seemed like a much bigger pool or was. But still like had these really close girlfriends by my side through those years and picked up a few more really close girlfriends along the way there that I again to this day like have been in their weddings. And my group is small, which I think will also be interesting to talk about in terms of my magazine life.
Yeah.
Because despite the fact that I am in like a very kind of public and what people think is like a very glamorous job, behind the scenes, like it's those girls that I've known my entire life that I spend my weekends and my time with. Because like, yes, they love going to fun dinners with me or going on a fun trip with me, but to your exact point, they know me pre-magazines, and, I think sometimes when you're in the magazine world, it can be, like, people always want something from you because
Yeah.
they want coverage, which is great and we're happy to do. But I love surrounding myself with people that kind of have nothing to do with my work life
Yeah.
in my personal time.
Yeah. I can imagine that, like, being in that kind of position. I mean, I when I worked at Aloe Yoga for a while and I was community manager, I started their community department. So was doing a lot of gifting and celebrity things and stuff like that. And, the interest is all great because it's like, that's my job to promote the brand and be out there in the community and share Aloe, but it was, I also sort of everyone was always asking for things, and sometimes it felt a little bit like it's hard to sift through intentions, and even it's a mixed thing because it's not all bad. It's not like people are just they're not interested in you at all, and they're just trying to get to, like, because of what your role is or whatever, and I'm sure, like, celebrities and stuff probably experience this on a even more macro
Yeah.
level. But, yeah, it gets kinda almost more important to keep your circle really tight, and I think it is easier to lean into relationships that were there, you know, before things sort of took off in a certain area. So you're an only child and going to this Catholic school where you were there for all the way from kindergarten, was it even preschool through 8th grade?
It was kindergarten to 8th
Kindergarten.
grade, but a
Okay.
lot of the girls that ended up at this school with me, I'd also been in preschool with. 'Cause
Okay.
San Clemente is like a very tight, small
Yes.
community, and at that time too, there weren't, I think, nearly as many schools as there are now for people to choose from, so it was kind of like, if you grew up in San Clemente and your parents were putting you in religious schools, like, these were probably the schools you were going to.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, that it sounds like you had such a positive experience being in one place for so long. I feel like during those years, though, I mean, having it be such a small group, I feel like it could go either way, right? Or that there could be some I've just heard from a lot of people where it's like, "Oh, it was nice when I was able to, like, change schools and, like, start fresh." But to kinda just be in the same little pod, what do you think made it more positive than, like, "Ugh, I can't wait to get into a new group of people?"
I think it's funny because when we started talking about this podcast, I was like, I've gotta go back in my mind to really
Yeah.
even think about this time in my life, and to your point, like, yes, I think overall, I would say my memories are very positive, but, like, it was not without the girl drama. I think especially with, like you said, being in such a small group, it was like, who got invited to whose birthday party and who's sitting with who. I mean, I think there was definitely some of that. I think what overall made it positive for me, one, I was into school. Like, I was admittedly someone that liked school. Like, I was never a kid that you needed to, like, be like, "Do your homework, sit down, get it done." Like, I was kind of a teacher's pet in a sense. Like, I wanted to please people. I liked doing homework, as weird as that is. Never math. I was, like, terrible at math and
Oh,
science,
same.
but anything to do with reading, writing, spelling from the beginning, I enjoyed, I liked, I excelled at. So I think, one, I just liked school in general. I liked learning. And two, I loved my teachers. Many of these teachers had been at this school for 10, 20 years, and they were like institutions. Like, I had the same third grade teacher that I had in seventh grade. So it was
That's
like, they
cool.
yeah, so it was like a lot of these teachers you grew up with. They were like, because they were such small classes, my day-to-day regular base items were taught by the same teacher all day. Like, I had a separate science teacher and I'd have like a separate PE teacher, but pretty much every other subject was taught by my main, like, school year teacher. So you were spending a lot of face-to-face time with one person versus high school. I didn't love having a different teacher for every single class
Yeah.
because, and like you said, it can go both ways, but I think I liked having this main person to create a relationship with. And for the most part, I really loved all those teachers. But, like you said, for better or worse, it was almost like that school was like a family because
Yeah.
you're spending your formative years together from 5 years old to, like, almost 14, which is obviously all the years you're, like, having crushes on boys and, like, again, there's, like, 5 guys to choose from. But,
Yeah.
it's funny, like, I think of my 8th grade graduation, which, because we'd all been together so long, that school, I don't know if they do it anymore, but at the time, like, they would do a week of graduation celebrations. Like, they would take you to Disneyland one day
Yeah.
with the class. They would
Amazing.
do a beach day one day with the class. They would do this surprise dance that was themed that, like, all the parents would go all in on, and, like, no one knew what the theme was until the night of. Like, they really made it a big deal,
Mhm.
and I mean, I can remember at that dance, which was, I think, the night before our actual graduation ceremony, I mean, the guys in my class were sobbing that, like, it was over
Yeah.
because we had just spent so many years together. I think it was a unique situation, but I think because the class size was small, the staff was small, if you didn't like it, you probably left earlier than 8th grade.
Yeah.
And we had that, we had people come in and out over the years. I think the class fluctuated anywhere from like 30 to 36. I think if you liked it and your parents liked it, like you were in it for the long haul.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
think that's a good comparison, even, like, just referring to it as, like, family, because anyone
Mhm.
that's had siblings or something where it's like, "Oh, you have a giant conflict," but it's like, that person's gonna be in your house, like, next door tomorrow, So it's like you can
Yeah.
eventually you're gonna have to kinda at least get over it enough to, like, see their face and move around in the same place as them. So it's like being in a school where it's like, "We're all gonna be here," that sense of almost, like, commitment to just showing up and being able to coexist and, like, work together enough to get through is, like, probably puts people in a place to be like, "Okay, I'm not gonna do anything too, damaging, I guess, to
Yeah,
each other
yeah,
because we're all
and
kind of in the same boat."
totally, and I think too, like, the parents were very involved. Like,
Yeah,
it's funny because I think of, like, Girl Scouts. I was in Girl Scouts from, like, gosh, like 1st grade to 8th grade, and
that's
the
fun.
only reason is because every girl in our class was in it, and it was, like, our best friends' moms that were the leaders, and we would basically just, like, go to someone's house, eat pizza, and, like, sell cookies. It wasn't like
Yeah,
there was no big, like,
like,
camping,
outing.
outdoors, like, no, we weren't, like, building fires. We were just like, "Oh, we're going to the movies together as girlfriends,"
Yeah,
It was I think because we also spent a lot of time with each other's families as well, it just I mean, to this day, if I ran into someone that I went to that school with, it's like you pick right back up where you left off.
yeah.
And even it's funny, like, we've kind of made it a tradition every Christmas, actually, this core group of 5 girls and we will go to dinner, like, every Christmas just to make sure, like, we all get together and we catch up with each other. Because a lot of us catch up with each other individually, but it's, like, rare that we're all together, especially now that people are married and kids and all those things, so it's like it's a very special thing, and I
Yeah.
think that laid the groundwork for a lot of things for me in my life.
I know. I feel like because I have 2 daughters now, I'm kind of evaluating the landscape of different, like, educational pathways you can take, and there really is so much out there, but I feel like, you kinda weigh the big school with the resources, or there's, like, smaller schools, some school types where it's like I can't remember what the word for it is, but like you said, where it's like one teacher can kinda be with you for a couple years and reappear again later. So that kind of continuity of the same people and keeping, like, the group smaller. It definitely sounds like you had the experience of that kinda smaller, more intimate experience and having it be really positive. Because I don't know if we've gotten into the experience of, like, going to a Catholic or religious,
Mhm.
school growing up. Do you feel like that impacted kinda your worldview during that time and even today?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because my parents were not Catholic before I went to this school, and my mom had never really grown up with religion in her life, and then her grandmother was Catholic. It was just her mom that never really carried it on,
Mhm.
but she was exposed to it to an extent with her grandmother. So that was kind of the one tie she had to Catholicism. And then my dad was born and raised Presbyterian by mostly his grandparents, but kind of fell off of it when they passed away, and in his adult life, went into the business world, and I just think it wasn't a priority. But when my parents got married, I think my mom really wanted me as a child to have something to hold on to, some kind of structure, hope, belief system. I think
Mm.
because she was not raised with that. And so when they were figuring out where to take me for school, she came across Our Lady of Fatima. And the principal actually told my dad, we tend to have to save these spots for kids that are Catholic. My parents both agreed that they would convert to Catholicism and raise me Catholic if they would let me into this school.
Wow.
So they did. I actually was baptized Presbyterian just because that was the tie through my dad. So I
Mhm.
went through this like conversion ceremony when I was like maybe in first grade.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, I'm sure I really wasn't understanding what I was saying or doing, but I think I just knew my parents wanted to be involved together in my schooling, and that school was very clear that if your child's gonna go here, like, the teaching that's going on religiously should be reflected in the home. So, like, my mom got baptized when I was 10, she was in her
Wow.
50s, and then my parents got remarried in the church, so they, like, fully kind of committed to this, that I think it was just important to them that I kind of have this in my life, and thank God I have, because we'll touch on it later. I've shared with you that my mom passed away when I was 28, and I don't think I would have survived any of that without having that groundwork of religion in my life. So, it's been a very positive thing for me. I know it can be a controversial topic for people. Some
Yeah.
people feel like the Catholic Church has gone through a lot of craziness, and even other religions too. I feel like the cult documentaries and religious documentaries are
Yeah.
so popular now, and it's tough because I can only speak from my experience, and that's what I tell people. And like, my boyfriend, for example, is not Catholic, and he, I think, has a little bit of a perception of what, a Catholic school would be. And I'm like, I was never taught by nuns. It was nothing crazy. So for me, it was really positive. I think it just gave me this sense from an early age that there's something bigger than me and that there is hope even when things aren't going your way.
Absolutely.
So,
Well,
it's always been positive for me.
yeah, thank you for sharing that, and I think you're all right that it's like there are kind of preconceptions, but I feel like even just, like, as I said before, going through this experience of, like, evaluating different types of schooling and ways to raise your children, there's, like, a backside to every different, like, recognized philosophy of learning out there, whether it's religious or not. So, I think it's important to also just shine light on positive experiences
Mhm.
and showing that it can look a lot of different ways. And thank you for sharing about your mom, and I excited to get into that a little bit later and how that's affected you, and how she's kinda impacted you. You mentioned that when you were in school, you were really into, like, reading, writing, spelling from the get-go. I'm thinking of what you do now, and it's like, okay, that actually, that sounds like a common thread that's probably been there from the beginning and is definitely a big part of what you're doing today. When you were that age, did you have any inkling of, like, what you might want to be when you grew up, and did that change at all?
I think it's funny. So, I think my earliest memories of, like, being into reading and writing are my mom taking me to the library in San Clemente, that to this day is there and I think still looks like it did when I was, like, 5.
Love that.
Um, but she always took me to the library and was always reading to me, like, to the point that I would memorize books as a kid. Like, I couldn't read them, but, like, she would, like, show my aunts and uncles, like, "Oh, she can read this book," and it's like, I couldn't read them, I had just memorized the book.
Yeah.
And going to the library was something we always did, and she was always, always reading to me. And then from there, I think I just started reading more on my own. I used to think I wanted to be a teacher. That was probably the first thing I thought, and I would, like, line up my dolls and teach them, and that was something I loved. And then even to the point that I was like, "Oh, I wanna be a librarian. I think it would be really fun to scan the books." Like, these are the weird things you think as a kid, right?
Yeah.
And then as time evolved, my dad was really into music, so I'm pairing reading, writing all the time with the fact that my father's always listening to music, is watching music shows, and I really start getting into music in probably, like, 3rd grade or so. I remember my mom for Christmas was given, like, a Madonna cassette tape and a Michael Jackson cassette tape, and I would listen to these tapes, like, over and over and over, which Madonna was probably not, like, the most appropriate thing for a
Yeah.
child, but I think it just goes over your head at that age.
Totally.
And then from there, I really started I grew up in the era of Britney and NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, and I started watching TRL all the time, and I was very into pop culture. So I started pairing the fact that I love pop culture, I love reading with how do I meet these celebrities? How do I talk to these celebrities? And at that time, it was either on a TV show, you were watching them on E! News or Total Request Live on MTV, or you were reading about them in magazines because we didn't have social media the way we do now. And celebrities just weren't accessible the way that they are now to us. So
Yeah.
I was fascinated with that from the get go as a kid. And my mom indulged that hard. Like she would take me to concerts. She took me to Britney. She took me to NSYNC at the Rose Bowl. She was more than happy to play right along with me because I really loved it. And I should also say I was also a kid that grew up like singing nonstop in my bedroom. So I'm either like reading about the celebrities or I'm singing the music because again, as an only child, like you don't really have siblings to
You're
be
like, "I'm entertaining
playing
myself."
with. Yeah, so I'm entertaining myself. So yeah, I was always singing, always reading, and I think I started probably around like 6th, 7th, 8th grade to be like, I really want to work for a magazine. Part of testing that out was I was on our yearbook staff like 7th and 8th grade. And
I was
this
just gonna
again was
ask. I was like, "Did you do any, like, school
yeah,
publications
yeah.
and stuff like
So
that?"
I was in choir for the singing half,
Yeah.
and then I was on yearbook staff. And this was in the era of, like, literally cutting photos, like,
Yes.
pasting them onto forms, and then
You're like,
scanning them,
Xerox. Yeah.
like, Xeroxing yes, but I
Yeah.
loved it. That was probably my first version of ever, like, creating what would be similar to a magazine because I was literally doing layouts for, like,
Yes,
collages
technically
and
editing, right?
yeah, it is technically editing. So that was probably my first place where I was like, "I love this. It's
Yeah.
really fun." It's and again, going back to the fact that I liked school, it was like a school project to me. It was like, here's the assignment, go create this beautiful thing from start to finish."
Yeah, and, like,
So
a physical thing to kind of be proud
mhm,
of after with, like, that love you had for books and even, like, the library and stuff to be able to have a product that you can kinda see and have it feel I mean, I look at magazines and I'm grew up as a crazy reader and stuff, and I've always loved, like, the written form, but I look at magazines, I'm like, "Really? Like, the layouts and stuff, this is kinda like architecture in a way." It's like it's art, but it also has to, like, make sense and be visually pleasing and not overwhelming, that
mhm,
there's, something very creative, but then also, like, organizational and,
mhm.
there's so many different pieces that go to it, so it's fun to think of you as like, a young person working on your yearbook. And it's fun for, the young women we work with. I think that there's interest in a wide range of different careers, right? But I have definitely found a lot of young women really interested. Like I've worked a lot of different careers at this point. But when they find out like I've been a model, they're like hyper interested in that thing or
Yeah,
anything that's around like fashion or entertainment and stuff, because that's just
mhm,
our culture just really fixates on those things. But it'd be fun for someone that maybe really does have a legitimate interest in magazines or media to know that it's like there are things you can kind of do to get your feet wet. Even in grade school, like I think that the yearbook production probably looks a little bit different than it did when we were, in middle school and high school, but there are outlets like that even when you're really young to kind of start flexing those muscles of editing, really.
definitely. And even now with the interns I have, and these girls are in college now, but I always tell people that I'm like, and I think recruiters tell you this too. It's like try to draw a string through your past, right? So it's like maybe if you want to be in fashion, but maybe you can't be a model or can't just jump into working for some huge brand. It's
Right.
like go work at a local retail store. Like get your feet wet in any way that you can and I tell people that too, that I'm like, work for your school newspaper, write for anything outside of a classroom that will get you a byline. Like, I think anything you can do beyond the day to day of what's expected of you and assigned to you will impress people or will help you get your foot in the door in the future. And even in high school, because like you said, I was into all of these things, fashion and stuff. Nordstrom used to do a program called like their fashion council or something. It was for teenagers. And you went and you applied and you got to like go to these meetings about trends and I think walk in like a little runway show and stuff. And so I did that in high school. I was always just like itching to be around this idea of celebrity and fashion and music and pop culture in any fashion. And most of that was going to concerts a lot. And especially growing up in Southern California, thank God it was very easy to do all of that
Yeah.
because
I
we
love
have
that.
such great proximity to it.
Totally. What would you say, because I feel like there are people that love live music and there are people that don't. What is it about, like, going to concerts, that you really, like, connected to from that age and sounds like continuing today?
Oh my gosh, yes. If there's anything I'm willing to like empty a bank account for, it's a concert. To this day, like, I
Yeah.
just bought Adele tickets for Las Vegas, which was very expensive, but,
Jealous.
and I poured out my bank account for Eras tour tickets for
Yep.
Taylor Swift. I mean, to this day, I'm pickier now because
Yeah.
especially concerts are so much more expensive than they were when we were younger. But I think what I really love about it is just, like, this world of escapism, and that's probably what I love about the arts too. It's like watching a great TV show or listening to a great podcast. It kind of takes you out of your own life for a moment. And not that I was really trying to escape anything, but there's just something to this day that seeing like Beyonce or Taylor Swift, pour their heart out on a stage just like energizes me and
Yeah.
invigorates me. Like I am still to this day an award show junkie. I watch the Grammys, I watch the Oscars, I watch all that stuff. And I think it's like it's nostalgic for me on one level because it is what I loved so much as a kid, and it's something that's really remained constant, but I just feel like there's nothing quite like being in a venue of thousands of people, like, screaming a song,
Yeah.
and the person that you've listened to on the radio or on your phone, being there live in person performing that song that either made you happy or helped you through a bad time or whatever it was. I think music to me is just, like, something I'm so passionate about.
Yeah. I feel like I am also my sister and I particular are, like, really just we love live music. It just brings us I think honestly, if I could think of anything, I would rather go to a concert than, like anything, like, a
Yeah.
great spa treatment or, like, going to a concert, like, a really good concert. 'Cause it's, like, so many people it's so benevolent, like, everybody's going there because they wanna have a good time, they wanna connect to it's like this collective voyeurism, and I think that
Mhm,
that kind of also applies to, like, people that like a certain podcast, like, in this podcast, part of it is kind of just indulging my insane curiosity about other people's, like, formative years, like, I'm crazy curious about that, and I think that there's a lot of people where it's like, okay, whether you're a young woman trying to explore, you know, what type of even, like, young person might go on to thrive in this career path or this one. But then also like adults, where it's like, oh, my life is already on this path or I'm doing this other thing. I'm just kind of curious like what this person is like or how they grew up. I feel like media in general just gives us this opportunity to really indulge in voyeurism and like really peeking into other people's lives, and when it's on a stage or on a platform or in a magazine, it's like there's something kind of nice about knowing that there's a lot of people that are doing the same thing you're doing by being curious about someone
mhm,
or the songs they're writing or, the way that they're kind of, looking at what's stylish right now or what are the hot luxury things, like that perspective. I think
mhm.
it's so fun to kind of plug into.
No, it
So
really
cool.
is.
I'm also curious, it sounds like your parents really, supported your interests and obviously, like, did and sacrificed a lot, to make sure you were in the right school and making sure you kind of grew up with this very particular foundation. You said you're an only child. Did your parents, like, deliberately have you as an only child, or what was that kind of like, that just being an only child in general?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So my parents I'm the product of second marriages for both of my parents.
Oh,
So
okay.
my mom was married for a first time when she was young in her 20s, lasted like a year or two, and she never had kids at that time. And I think she thought she was just going to go off and like be a career woman. And I think really had no interest in having kids. Like she kind of admits that. And then when she met my dad had 2 sons from a previous marriage. So I technically have 2 half brothers, but I never lived with them. I never really grew up with them. So I kind of consider myself an only just in terms of my upbringing.
Mhm.
But my mom didn't have me until she was 38,
Oh.
and my dad was 48 when I was born. So I think for my dad, it was like, and his sons at that time were 14 and like 12. So I
Yeah,
think my
so
dad was like,
huge
"Oh my
gap.
gosh, we're starting over with this child again." Honestly, I think a big part of why my mom finally decided later in life that she did want a child beyond obviously marrying my dad and I think wanting a family with him was there was a woman that lived next door to us who had never had children and she was elderly and her husband passed away and my parents went to this funeral and my mom was like so struck by the fact that this woman didn't have children. Like she'd had her husband, but after this long life, like there wasn't this piece to carry on what she'd had with her husband. And my mom says that that was like a really pivotal thing for her that she was like, I don't want to be, in my 70s or 80s and potentially like be alone. Like, not my mom had family and she has
Yeah.
siblings, but, I think it just struck her that as, she got a little bit older and she'd accomplished things in her life, that that was maybe one piece that was missing. And she always says that she probably would have had more children if she'd known how much she loved being a mom. But obviously, when you have a child at 38, you're a little bit more limited,
Yeah.
especially back in the 80s. But so, yeah, I think, but for me, it was positive. I, most of my friends, all of my friends really have siblings. And I envied that for a long, and I still do envy that to an extent. But I also think I grew up being very comfortable talking to adults because I was around adults all the time, and maybe that's helped me in some manner in
Sure.
terms of interviewing and, being in kind of a very, like, public role, is that I've always kind of been comfortable, having to stand on my own without, like, a sibling right next to me,
Mhm.
and I liked being an only child for the most part, and I think my friends would tell you that I'm probably kind of the anti-only child because I think we get a bad reputation as, like, they're selfish, they can't share, it's all about them, and I don't really think I ever was like that, probably because my parents wouldn't have allowed me to be like that.
Yeah.
And
Sounds
again,
like
I
they were
had a
very.
I had a lot of friends that I was with all the time, and they were like my extended siblings to an extent, so
That's what I was gonna say. I'm like, growing up in the school that you did particularly to is almost like it sounded like the kids that you were in school with, it's like kind of became your siblings for a good chunk of time,
Mhm,
and obviously, like, those relationships have continued to grow. I know it's funny because I feel like whether you're an only child or you're a middle child or a youngest child or oldest child, like, there's always, like, stigma about whatever you might be and what it might how it might influence you. I'm a middle child, and it's just like, okay, yeah, but I found it to be, there are elements where it's like birth order or lack of birth order can influence
mhm.
you sort of, but it's all just really how you make it. And I think it's really interesting your point about just being really comfortable around adults because yeah, like you're in a role and I'm excited to kind of get into how you started your career and the steps that you took because you made a lot of big steps and moves in a very serious and competitive industry very quickly. And I think that maybe part of that is being able to kind of navigate confidently and independently for a lot of things. So yeah, so take us to high school. You're working for a yearbook, your choir stuff. Tell us a little bit about like how high school was for you. Was there any point in like your young teen or late teen years where you struggled a lot with anything, or were there any kind of like hiccups or obstacles for you during that time?
I think probably like every girl at that age, just insecurities. Like I'm 5'10". I was very tall from the time I was probably like 10 years old. I was always as tall as the boys, if not taller. I think I was like 5'7" by 7th grade, and you're like 12 at that age. So that was probably my one big insecurity, was that I kind of hated at that age being this like tall person that sort of stuck out whether I wanted to or not. And, I think going to school in Orange County too, I mean, we grew up in a very attractive community. Like,
Yeah.
we grew up around a lot of really beautiful people. And I think I had those natural insecurities of being like, "Oh, these girls look this way or they look that way, and I'm so tall and I'm not petite like these other girls." And, so some of that I think played into my teen years, I think, as it does for almost every girl in some manner.
Mhm.
But I don't think I really had any like huge issues. Maybe that I wish boys liked me more. I never really dated. I was not the girl that had like a boyfriend. I had crushes for sure. And I had, guys that I would hang out with, but I never really had like the big boyfriend
Yeah.
until I was probably like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And so I envied that at that age for sure. I was like, why is everyone getting asked to prom? And like, I'm not. And
Yeah.
my boyfriend now is like, "Come on, like, you 100% were." And I'm like, "No, I really wasn't. I just
Yeah.
had a lot of girlfriends." And, I don't know at that age. I think
Yeah.
I was very comfortable with my girlfriends and in the things that I liked to do, but I was not like a girl that was, like, attracting all the guys by any
Yeah.
means.
I
And
think that being tall is such a funny thing too. It's like now that I'm an adult, I love being tall. I think it has so
yeah,
many
I do. I now
advantages,
I do. Now I do.
but I did have that I kinda shut up very quickly. I was always, like, lanky and stuff, but I got taller than the boys in, like, my freshman year of high school, and I think that I definitely felt that, we focus a lot on the podcast about how common it is for the things that make us different during that time, like, those are the things that we just wanna keep down and, like, hide. Like, I don't wanna be different from anyone. I wanna just be just like the people that are, having it all
Mhm.
together, but it's like, it's usually those things that really help us shine later on, but I just remember, like, even my posture and stuff in pictures, like, I was always kinda, like,
Oh, yeah.
making myself smaller, and, physically, but probably, like, emotionally too, around people, and I think it did kinda cause me to be a little bit of a late bloomer in that arena, but now I'm also kinda grateful for that because 'cause I'm like, "You know what? I was really focused on the other things that were interesting to me, and that got me where I was supposed to be at the time." So, I think it's fun to kind of paint the picture because you might think that like, "Oh, this girl that is like a magazine editor, she's a beautiful blonde bombshell." You're like, "Oh," like, yeah, you see all the movies about the magazine editor girl. You might assume that that person is someone that maybe was adjusted just perfectly in the center of every friend group from day 1,
No.
and that's
I think, the more that I think about it, like I said, I had this amazing positive experience from kindergarten to 8th grade. But that high school transition was tough because I did go from here are my like core girls to now I'm thrown into this mix of a lot of different people from from a lot of different schools. And it was hard to be thrown into that because I think in this small school, it was like you were a big fish in a little pond, and now all of a sudden you are very small fish.
mhm,
And that was an adjustment for sure because I've always been a quality over quantity type of person when it's come to friendships. I'm not someone that typically hangs out in like groups of 10 girls at a time. I'm
mhm.
more like, here are my core girls, and like I spend one-on-one time with each of them, or maybe two or three of us gather together. But like I was never someone that really could do like a lot of surface friendships and be, kind of in the mix of all of that. I was always more like, I would rather have, my 5 girlfriends that like I could tell anything to than kind of have the 20 friends that know like little tiny bits and pieces about my life. And that's no knock to anyone that has
Yeah,
that skill. I just don't. And I think now I'm probably better at putting it on a little bit because
You sort
it's
of have
part of my
to.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah, to host things and to be in big groups, and I'm comfortable with it. It's not that I'm not. And I was in a sorority in college and all of that, but I would say, like, that freshman to senior year sort of time frame was definitely the adjustment of, like, am I shy? Am I outgoing? Like, I've been so used to being with these same people and these same teachers that always know me, and now I'm having to start over, and I don't really love that.
Yeah.
And, I knew other girlfriends of mine, like, I can think of the girl that was sort of the queen bee in my class growing up. She went through a major struggle freshman year of just not kind of being the girl that lit up the room anymore. Like, there were
Yeah.
50 girls lighting up the room
Context
now.
change, yeah.
Yeah, no, it totally changed, and I think we all found our footing as we went, and I would say probably, like, my junior and senior year, I felt much more like, "These are my girlfriends, this is my group," even if, like, the boy that I liked didn't ask me to prom, I still had friends to go with, I was still being included in things. But definitely probably the freshman and sophomore year when you're, like, just trying to figure out what the heck this new school is about and
Yeah.
can I trust and who can I, be around. It's
And all the
hard, it's
hormones and
really
stuff are, like,
hard.
coming in hot at that time for most people
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, and you also feel like and I feel for young girls, you do at that time feel like, "Oh my gosh, that test," or, "Oh my gosh, that presentation," or the fact that I have to sit next to this guy in class, how am I gonna deal with that? Like, those things feel so big at that
Yeah.
age, and it's really hard to, like, calm yourself down and take a check from your emotions because, like you said, your emotions are just, like, raging at that age.
Yeah.
And I can remember definitely getting in the car with my mom and, like, crying after a day of school of, like, fighting with a girlfriend or, like, feeling like I embarrassed myself in front of the class or something.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
so funny, as you're saying that, I feel like I so distinctly remember having a fight with my dad about like, I was in a bunch of AP classes and stuff in high school, and I don't know, I was in a fight with him, and I remember, like, calling him out and being like, "Do you think my accomplishments mean nothing?" And his response was like, "Kinda, you're in high school." And I just felt so insulted by that because I was literally like, to me, everything I'd worked so hard for, it feels big because it's all you know. You like that's your lifespan. I think it's easy to kind of like look back, in our 30s where it's like we're looking back and saying like, oh, like I have perspective on these things and now I can look at high school, but like in when you're in the thick of it at that time, it's like,
Mhm.
it is all you know. And who asks you to prom or doesn't ask you to prom and, like, having to give a presentation in front of all your peers, like, it is big stuff because that's what you're in the middle of at the time.
Yeah. No, it is, and I just remember too, like, the high school I went to, I think academically was great, but at least at that time, coming from San Clemente, where I feel like I grew up around affluent people, but I didn't grow up around very showy people. And
Mhm.
then going to this new school where it was a very wealthy group of kids that went there. I was also sort of like put off by that. It was like I wasn't used to being around kids that were like being handed keys to Range Rovers and BMWs at 16.
Yeah.
And I was like, "I just want the Jetta,"
Yeah.
like, that was the cool car when I was
Yeah.
in high school was, like, the Jetta.
Yes.
But, I think it was also, like, the level of wealth I saw in that school was sort of off-putting to me, and I know Orange County can get a bad rap for that to an extent, but just to speak on, like, where my life sort of headed from there, like,
Mhm.
that was a big reason that I wanted to go to college out of state too, was those high school years of feeling like gosh, I feel like I'm only being exposed to, like, one type of person in
Yeah.
this world, and like I said, it wasn't all bad, and there were lovely, wonderful people during that time, but I think it made me feel like, "Is everyone like this? Like, is this what Orange County is, and is this what life is like? Like, what
Yeah.
is beyond Southern California?" And that was a really big reason that I was like, "I'm gonna go to college in Ohio," of all
Yeah.
places.
So, when you were applying and stuff, I mean, it's so interesting to kinda hear people's college applications are so interesting for young people because it's like, especially if you haven't been in a family where you're traveling all over the country and you even really know what the different states are like, it's kind of hard to like look at all these brochures and be like, yeah, that one, you know? When you were applying for schools, what were you kind of looking for? Did you already have a sense of like, oh, this is what I want to major in, or this is the city I want to live in? How did you kind of navigate that process?
So I knew I wanted to go to a school that was very Greek. I loved the idea of being in a sorority. And maybe that at that time was my desire to be like, I want to make big groups of girlfriends and like have this big, extended family. And so I knew I wanted a school that was super Greek. I knew I did not really want to go somewhere in Southern California, just for the sake of like, I was ready to be exposed to something else. So my mom actually hired a woman that specialized in helping kids with college applications. And I'm pretty sure that she still does this in Orange County. It was called Ed Vantage Consulting. I'll give her a
Uh-huh.
little plug. Her name was Lisa,
Love it.
ED Vantage Consulting.
Catchy.
And basically, she came over to my house and made me take all these surveys as to what I wanted in a school. And from there, she narrowed that down to like, here are your reach schools, like the schools that'll be a little tougher to get into. And here's the schools you'll probably get into. And here's the schools that you're like a shoe in for. And then we whittled that big list down based on, you know, size of the school. I knew I didn't want to go to a super small school. I also knew I didn't want to go to like a school of 60,000. And I went to Miami University of Ohio, which people always are like, what do you mean? Miami's in Florida. There's also a
Yeah.
Miami in Ohio. It's like 16,000. It was kind of right in the middle. And my dad is from Indiana, so I had grown up as a child going to our lake house we have in Indiana. We'd spend like 2 or 3 weeks there every summer. So that was sort of my one taste of kind of another state.
Yeah.
My dad's from Indiana, my mom's from Oregon, so I'd also
Okay.
spent some time in Oregon. But I really loved all of my friends I had at our lake house, and these were all kids that lived in Ohio, and their parents had lake houses up there for the weekend. And I was like, "These kids are just so nice, and everyone in the Midwest is so nice." And
Yeah.
so I applied to Indiana University. I applied to a really small school in Indiana because I had gone to a singing camp there in high
Yeah.
school, more of my singing stuff. But I decided that school was just really too small. It was like 1,200 kids.
Yeah.
And my parents took me to Miami to visit it, took me to IU to visit it, and I just fell in love with how beautiful the campus of Miami is. Anyone who's listening, Google Miami University. It's gorgeous. It's all like brick roads, brick buildings. It looks very similar to Harvard in terms of being like very old and collegiate. It's over 200 years old. So I wanted that experience of going somewhere else. And yes,
Yeah.
this woman really helped me narrow down where I wanted to go.
That's so
And
cool to be able to have someone kinda guide you through that
mhm,
process. So when you decided to go, it's so interesting because it's like coming from K to 8 being in the same school, same group of people, and then having that definitely being kind of a uncomfortable experience going into high school and having to kinda, like, redefine yourself there after being in a very comfortable, familial group of people. You're saying that that was a little uncomfortable, but you then also chose a school where it was like, okay, new state, completely new vibes. Like you think you're connected to the Midwestern feel, but to really go off on your own, it almost seems like you were leaning into that discomfort a little bit from, you know, just separating a little bit more and being on your own.
yeah, and maybe that's partly my only child, like independent nature.
Yeah.
But yes, to your point, I mean, I knew one girl that was going there who was in my class actually at Santa Margarita, but we like loosely knew each other. We never really hung
Yeah.
out. And then once we found out we were both going there, it was like, oh, we should, connect over this. We hung out a few times our freshman year, but beyond that, we were never really like that close. Yeah, it was a huge leap of faith. And it was hard at first. It was really hard. I mean, I think the weather alone was like, "What have I done?" I've moved from sunny and 75 every day of the year to it's cold by October, and it's cold up until, like, April,
Yeah.
potentially. and it's snowing. I
Yeah.
mean, I had never seen it snow until I went to this college. Like, that's how sort of unprepared I was for that part of it. And it was hard. My freshman year, I considered transferring out to the point that I applied to Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles and was like, "I'm gonna go back to what I know. I can't do this."
Yeah.
And then I got into Loyola Marymount. I mean, I was very, very close to making this change, but I had just initiated in my sorority my freshman year, and they didn't have that chapter at Loyola Marymount. So I was gonna have to give up this whole idea of being in the Greek system because once you initiate, like, that's it, you're done.
Yeah.
So I decided, I'm like, I'm gonna stick it out. Like, let me see how the second semester goes. My parents also, because we had a lake house in Indiana, were more than willing to come and visit me
Nice.
and, cure any of that kind of homesickness. But ultimately, I stuck it out, and I'm so glad I did because I now have this whole group of girlfriends across the country that are in all these different states that really do become like your family when you're in college because you're living with them, and that's who you have to turn to instead of mom and dad after, a day in class. But, um, I think that experience probably made me pretty brave in a lot of ways that I realized, I can go off and do my own thing, and that definitely translates into how I ended up with Modern Luxury.
Totally. What sorority were you in?
I was in Gamma Phi Beta.
Okay, I feel like I don't remember if UCLA had that one. How do you feel like sorority life, impacted your college experience, and even just kinda like how you work around women today?
I loved it. I got into the sorority, that was my first pick. The show Greek is actually based on Miami. The
Oh,
guys that
cool.
came up with that show went there. And Miami is super Greek. There's like 20 plus sororities, 20 plus fraternities.
Wow.
So it was kind of like if you were going there and you weren't probably doing sports or Greek life, like I'm not sure where you were socializing because that was kind of everything that went on there. But I would say it was a positive experience for me because I really connected with the girls that were in Gamma Phi, and I knew from the beginning of Rush, that that was what I wanted. And thankfully that it worked out. But I think one thing I loved about my sorority and probably why I gravitated towards that group of girls was that after going to a high school that I thought was kind of very like cookie cutter, everyone wanted to look the same way. My sorority was like very diverse. Like there were girls that looked all different ways. There were girls that were, you know, athletes. There were girls that were in the arts. It was a very eclectic group of people, and I loved that. It wasn't like you met one girl, you knew them all.
Yeah.
And I think, and no offense to other sororities,
Yeah.
but, like, there can be that sort of, mentality, and I think even, like, the Bama TikToks now and, like, how public now Rush is, which I
Yeah.
didn't deal with any of that when I was there. I can't imagine how hard that is now.
Totally.
Um I think it was easier to rush sororities and probably a more positive experience then because Facebook was like just kind of getting going when I was rushing at that age. I know it's a totally different ball game now,
I know.
but
I feel like just I was a little after, but there was like a period of time where it was like in order to get a Facebook, you had to have like a university account,
yeah,
like email address. That was kind of like where my sister was coming up into. And so like Facebook was really the only place where like the sororities existed. So that's where I was like kind of doing my research when I was rushing. But yeah, I do think that there is even today, there's a there's a preconception that like, oh, to be a sorority girl means a certain thing. And then it's like, oh, it's really focused on like aesthetics and like popularity stuff and clicks and all this stuff. And it's like, no, there are actually some really amazing experiences that you can have in a sorority. And it's not all about that stuff. I'm sure there are sororities where that's is important and like that's an experience like people might want to have, but that it can also be based on all sorts of different things and an opportunity to really plug into a social circle that will, that can last beyond your college years and even into like your children's college years if, you so
definitely.
choose. So in college, did you at this time were you still kind of leaning into the magazine stuff? Were you getting internships? What was that? connect to.
Yes. So I knew early on, I was like, I'm majoring in journalism. I know that's what I want to do. I want to dive more into this world. Miami structured it so that you really didn't touch your major until I think your second year. So I was just getting I was like, let me get all these math classes out of the way that I can't stand. And let me get
Yeah.
all these other things like the math and science. I was like, I want it as far away from me as possible. But I can write an essay all day long.
Totally.
So Miami also, interestingly, and I'm not sure if it's still this way, but if you chose journalism as your major, you had to double major. And I don't know why that was, but it was just the way that it was. So I also majored in English literature because I thought, let me pick a major that I know I can handle and I like and I can do well while I'm trying out this sort of new version of what I like. So I double majored. I took like 21 credits a semester, which is a lot.
Yeah.
I was starting to get my feet wet there. I knew pretty quickly that I was like, I don't think I want to do the broadcast side. I don't think I want to do the newspaper side. I always knew while I personally love true crime and I love like hard hitting stuff and investigative journalism, I just knew I'm like, I can't be too close to that stuff.
Yeah.
It's too hard to sort of emotionally go there. So I knew again, I'm like, I want to do lifestyle. I want to do celebrity, something in that sphere. So the summer between my junior and senior year, I interned for Ryan Seacrest, which was really interesting. And people are always like, how the heck did you get this internship? Because he has a website. He has a company called Ryan Seacrest
Mhm.
Productions. This is what produced the Kardashians and all of these shows that we know that have gone on to be so big. So my internship that I was applying for was to write for his website, which was kind of like an e-news sort of website. And I applied off Twitter. Like, I didn't know anyone. It wasn't that I had an in by any means. And I ended up getting an email back. And I went and I interviewed and I got the internship. But it wasn't like I had some big background. But I think what did help me in my time at Miami, we had a school magazine that I wrote for. And I was doing like fashion-esque pieces and, covering whatever band came to play at our bars or our concerts or whatever. And then I was also on something called Concert Board where we would plan, I think it was like a fall and a spring concert. And it was like big names. We had like Goo Goo Dolls and Kid Cudi and like
Cool.
cool people. So it was really fun to be part of that. And again, this was me trying to like put my feelers out of how can I sort of get into this world beyond my journalism classes because my journalism classes were giving me the tools, but like my teachers weren't asking me to write about Britney Spears. It wasn't like that. So yeah, so I did concert board or I did our school magazine. And then I was also part of a group called Up 2010, which may or may not still exist. That was for like young journalists and you had group meetings and they just helped you like put your feelers out for internships.
Cool.
I also interned for the Style Network. I should say that was pre Ryan Seacrest. That's
Yeah.
probably how I got Ryan Seacrest. But the Style Network, I also applied to just cold off of a website, did not know anyone. But I will say my experience at the Style Network that I think really helped me, and I know for a fact helped me get my job at Modern Luxury. When I was interviewing for that, and this was a summer internship, it was unpaid at the time. I said to them, I'm like, well, are you going to hire other interns? What's kind of the lay of the land? Because she'd asked me if I wanted to work like 2 days a week. And she said, yeah, we'll probably hire two interns and I'll have, one here 3 days and one here 2 days. And I said, well, would you consider only hiring me if I worked 5 days a week? And she agreed to that. So I worked 40 hours a week,
Wow.
like a real
Good
job,
job. Yeah.
unpaid, but I was like, it's the Style Network. And the
Yeah.
Style Network at the time was part of E. So I was like in the same building as where they were doing E News and they were doing Kiss FM and they were doing all these big things that were going on in Los Angeles. So I would sit on my lunch breaks and just like watch celebrities walk in and out of this building for meetings. So it
Cool.
was like a dream to me that I
Yeah.
was like, of course I want to be here 40 hours a week. But by the end of that internship, I had like over 100 bylines on their website. And that
Amazing.
included E Online as well. So that helped me 100%, I know, getting the modern luxury job because my internship coordinator, who I'd spent 5 days a week with for 3 months, was who was my big reference for my interview with modern luxury. So I would encourage people, if you have the means, if you're able, like, do more than 1 day a week at an internship. Like, get as much face time as you can. Cultivate that relationship with whoever you're working for, because in those early years when you're trying to get your first job, like, those are the people that can speak up for you. Also, just being able to walk away again with real bylines before I had graduated, I think helped me and differentiated me in a lot of ways.
That is such a
So
great story and such like an out of the box way to even approach the opportunity is kinda like, okay, this is something, it's a one of maybe 3 interns, but to, I think it's fun for young people to know that like the people hiring you, usually, unless you're in a super, super corporate setting, usually like the internships are a little bit flexible, like they need an extra set of hands. Like there's somebody coming up with that job description, there's room for an intern to, like, go above and beyond and become more important than maybe
mhm,
the people hiring you even intended. So, I think that that advice to really just, like, max out your internship, find someone that you can connect with, and if you think it's a place that interests you, like, keep asking for responsibility because, like, 9 times out of 10, like, if there's a young, energetic, responsible person that wants to show up and take on responsibilities, busy people who are hiring interns are gonna be like, "Yes, and how can I help you back?" Especially
yeah.
if you're not working for pay, I think that there might actually be more laws about, like, not being able to have
Yeah, it's
unpaid
different now.
interns
I think
anymore, but you're probably not making that much money, right? And I think that if y it could be like, "Oh, man, I'm, like, working this crazy internship for, like, not really a lot of money." Know that, like, the people hiring you are probably aware of the fact that you're not making that much money in your internship, and if you go above and beyond, I think that just in general, when someone provides a lot of value to you in any way, most people have a natural impulse to reciprocate. So it's
Mhm,
like if you really go out of your way to make someone's life easier that you're working under, that person, when it comes time for them to give you a reference or introduce you to someone in the industry or hire you for a real paid position, they're going to turn around and that
mhm.
energy will hopefully come back to you. So I love that's such a good story that you shared. Can you tell us a little bit about like the next steps from that point and like just your start at modern luxury and some of like the big milestones you made there?
Yeah. Yeah, so I graduated from Miami in May of 2011, and I think because I still was like, "Oh, I wanna get my foot in the door more, I think at that time I was like, "I wanna work for E! News, I wanna work for that sort of world where I was
Yeah.
just gonna do celebrity and fashion." I thought, where can I get a lot of connections? I should go to USC because USC has produced, I mean, they're really known for their entertainment programs, their film school, their communication school. So I thought, okay, I'm going to leave Miami and I'm going to go do USC for grad school. And I thankfully got in. I was very excited to get in. So I went to Annenberg that fall. And I quickly realized after majoring in journalism and majoring in English and carrying this huge workload for 4 years that I was really burnt out when I showed up in the fall. And, like I said, I always liked school. I was always someone that was pretty fine to do assignments and to be there, and I was never really someone that resisted that sort of environment, but when I got to USC, I realized really quickly that I was like, I would rather be at my internships. And I should correct
Interesting.
this. I did Style Network in college, and then Ryan Seacrest was when I was at USC. I
Hmm.
flip-flopped them.
Yeah.
But so anyways, so I started interning for Ryan Seacrest that same fall, and I was there pretty much every waking moment that I wasn't in a classroom. And I remember my first day at SC, they even told us, like, "Do not go get an internship this first semester." And I was like, I had already signed on the dotted line for
Yeah.
Ryan Seacrest, and I wasn't about to pull out of that.
You're like,
So I was like,
I'm
"I'll
just
make it work."
yeah.
This is the whole reason I'm here is that I want
Totally.
these connections and these opportunities. And at that time, especially, and I know even for our company, we do require people to get college credit. So that was how I had these opportunities at that time. So I realized during that first semester that I really wanted to be working. I already knew what I wanted to do. I really didn't want to sit in a classroom anymore. And I would have rather spent 40 hours a week at Ryan Seacrest than take some hours away. And I was really trying to get hired there. That was my plan. I had really good relationships with the two men that managed me to the point that they were also became references for me when I ultimately interviewed with Modern Luxury. But those relationships are key. Like, if there's any takeaway here, like, that is the takeaway, that forge those relationships. So long story short, when I had graduated from Miami in May of 2011, when I was kind of up in the air about going to SC for a moment, I had applied to a position with Modern Luxury at our Orange County magazine, which I know is where I am now, and sent that resume. That went into the abyss of resumes like we all do on
Yeah.
LinkedIn or wherever we apply, and I just forgot about it. I never thought about it again. I went off to USC, and that was that. And then in January of 2012, I get contacted by this woman named Beth Weitzman, who ultimately in this story becomes my mentor. She was amazing and is to this day. I still talk to her all the time for career advice. I get an email that's like, "Hey, we found your resume on file from a search we did last spring. Just kind of wanted to touch base with you, see where you're at. We have this position open in Hawaii for a magazine there. Would you be interested in interviewing?" And I was at this place where I was like, "Get me out of grad school. I want to work." So I jumped at this. I was like, "Yes, I'm
Yeah.
interviewing. No problem." And my mom was like, "You're gonna move to Hawaii? Are you insane? Like, what? Like, we're paying for USC. What are you doing?" But I just knew, I'm like, I really want this. I wanna do this. So I interviewed for the Hawaii position, didn't get it, which I shouldn't have. It was like fully running a magazine there. I think because of my style network experience, it was creating a custom publication for a shopping place there. And I think they thought, that might translate. So that was probably why they considered me, but didn't get the position. I leave grad school in the meantime. I'm like, I'm out. I want to job hunt full time, which much to my parents' dismay at the time. And then she came back to me about a month later and said, "Your interviews went well. I know that wasn't the right position, but I have this assistant editor position in Atlanta. Would you be interested in interviewing?" And I said, "Okay, like, let's do it." And my mom again is like, "You're going to now move to Atlanta? Like, what? You just got back from Ohio. What are you
Yeah.
doing?" But I'm like, "Mom, I've always wanted to work for a magazine." And this was a lifestyle magazine that was all about people ages like 20 to 35 in Atlanta. And it was dining and nightlife and celebrity. And I mean, it was exactly what I had wanted. And so we interviewed. And again, I was like, I've got to beat out people that know Atlanta, that live in Atlanta. And I went above and beyond. I mean, I was giving her PowerPoint presentations, and I was telling her too. And I think this is also a very good takeaway for people, is I think enthusiasm goes a long way. Like, people want to hire people that are excited about a company and are
Mhm.
excited about a position, even if you're not as qualified as someone that maybe has every single check mark on a piece of paper. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, I think you want to work with people that you like.
Yeah.
And I remember telling her, like, "You probably do have people that know Atlanta better, that are more qualified than me in some ways, but I promise you, like, no one will be more enthusiastic about this, more passionate about this, or will work harder for you. Like, I promise you that." And ultimately, I got the job. And I think that was probably part of it, is that I've learned that now, especially, that most people will not do those things or
Yeah.
be that forward. But I think that forwardness, for better or worse, has gotten me to a lot of the places that I've ultimately ended up, because the only person that will advocate for you at the end of the day is you. And if you don't stand up and ask for the raise or ask for the promotion or ask for the responsibility, like, normally that big busy person that you're working for isn't even thinking about it. Like, they don't know
Yeah.
that you're itching for these things.
And it might not
And
even be that you're not doing an outstanding job. Like, I think that that's such a good piece of advice, especially for women. It's like you could be doing such a good job that things are moving so seamlessly that someone kind of maybe forgot that, like, oh yeah, we should probably be advancing that person or giving them an additional challenge or something. So to be like your own advocate and really like step up and remember to periodically ask. Sometimes people are like, yeah, actually, that's a great idea. You totally deserve that. And you won't know until
Yeah.
you ask. Or if they're like, I can't afford that, but I can do this for you, or I can introduce you to someone I know that has more, room for growth for you or whatever it is. Like you just don't know. No one, I think that for better or for worse, there's this kind of fantasy that someone else might like discover us or
Mhm.
show up and drop an opportunity in our lap. And sometimes that happens, but like consistently, it probably won't, and if it
Mhm.
happens for you, it might just happen once. So I think that advice to just like continue to step up and ask for more. I mean, in 5 years, you literally made a series of leaps to being editor in chief. Can you tell us a little bit about how you facilitated that and why you felt confident enough to get those roles?
Yeah. Yeah. So the woman that hired me, like I said, her name is Beth Weitzman. She's amazing. She's like such a powerhouse. And she's definitely someone that I admire endlessly for the fact that she has such a presence and a voice and stands by her beliefs. And she was who hired me. So I get hired on as an assistant editor with her. And I'm at the time, I'm under like two or three other girls. But again, this was a situation where I'm like, okay, I've now moved to Atlanta. I'd never even been to Atlanta. I like called the one girl that I knew there who was in my sorority. She
There you
had
go.
moved there from Pittsburgh. And I'm like, okay, wherever you're living, I know you have good taste. I know you would live in a safe place. I'm just going to lease an apartment in that building. And that building ended up being 2 blocks from my office, which
Perfect.
was fate in a sense. So I moved there sight unseen. My mom is sweet enough to deal with all this with me, moves me down there. So yeah, I started as an assistant editor, but very quickly I'm like, I really love celebrity and I really love fashion. Like, could I help curate fashion pages? Could I sit in on photo shoots? I was always asking for more than my job description, probably from the very beginning, once I kind of got a little comfortable, maybe a few months in. And within the first 6 months that I worked there, at this point, I think I had shown her enough of my, day-to-day fundamental skills that she let me go after pursuing, the actress Ashley Tisdale, who was, like, probably best known for High School Musical.
Mhm.
She was filming a movie in Atlanta, and I said, "Do you mind if I go after her for a cover? Like, she's filming a movie here." And she's like, "Yeah, if you can get them to say yes, like, okay." So I went after her for that. Her team was all over it, and my boss literally let me, like, coordinate a photo shoot for her, run the photo shoot, write the 6-page feature. So it was like I did this as an assistant, and I was under an associate editor and a deputy editor, but it was really because I asked, and because I had this direct relationship with our boss, and I was always quick to, again, for better or worse, it depends on your environment that you work in, but, I think she trusted me because I always was coming to her about like, "Hey, I've seen this. Could I pursue this? Hey, do you feel this is the right fit for us?" So I was kind of trying to create these opportunities for myself, even though they weren't handed to me. And again, you have to kind of read your environment. I'm sure there are certain corporate environments that would be like, please sit down and stop asking for all this stuff.
Yeah.
But in my field where we're so creative and we're collaborative, I think she loved that I was so eager to help. And really, because I moved there knowing one person, like my whole focus was this magazine. That was how I was meeting people and how I was getting acclimated to a totally new city. So that was sort of what led to this series of promotions, was that she just started giving me more responsibilities the more I was proving that I could handle these things. And so that kind of quickly went from assistant editor to associate editor, which was really just a title change. I was pretty much doing very similar things
Mhm.
to ultimately being our deputy editor. So then I was managing people at that point. I had one girl that was under me. And that was sort of my first real taste of like management structure, crafting lineups for the magazine, watching the budgeting. Like I was more at a higher picture of creating the product versus just being in the weeds on like certain assignments.
Mhm.
And again, I think it was her trusting me, and she was also the vice president of our company as well, so being the editor in chief was not her sole focus whatsoever, and she had been the editor in chief for almost 15 years at that time, but her roles in the company were changing. So I think this was also a matter of the right time, the right place to an extent. But it was also me proving myself along the way and, really, like, working my butt off. I mean, I was in that office from probably 8:30 AM to as late as, like, 8 PM on certain days. But I was dedicated, and I mean, I still put in long hours, but I also loved it, and it also helps when you really have a passion to be able to work hard on something.
Totally.
So
I feel like it's that flow state where it's like you don't realize it's one of those things where you just like you hone in, you like look up at the clock and you're like, oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock.
mm,
Versus being like, I need to stay here until 8 o'clock so that I like people see me doing it. It's like, no, can you find a place where it's like time stretches because you're focused, and you're doing something that you care about, where it's like those long hours are actually more impressive.
mhm.
I love it. What would you say, you're editor in chief now. What are the biggest elements? We're a company that really focuses on confidence and communication for women. Are there certain practices, beliefs, pieces of advice that you really stick with or remember every day when you're doing your job?
I think one of my biggest mantras in all of these things that I've done in my life has been like, what is the worst that's gonna happen? They're gonna say no. So like if you ask for a promotion, if you ask for a raise, if you ask for more responsibility, like realistically, what is the worst that's going to happen? They're gonna say no. And like, yes, that sucks. But that's kind of always been my mantra is like, that's the worst that will happen to me is that they say no. But at least I've tried. And I also feel like, someone has to get the job. Someone has to get the internship. So like why not you? And I think that was kind of the mentality I went into applying to cold internships off Twitter. It was like someone has to get there. So have the belief that it can be you. And even now in my day to day, like now that I manage younger girls and, I have assistants that help me and freelance writers and interns, I'm always encouraging them, like, please let me know if there's a certain topic that you love. Like, tell me. I'll make sure to try to help you give you more of those stories. Ask me questions. Like, don't be afraid to approach me. And I think that that's something that as women, we're often I think we feel like we have to, like, sit down and be polite and, like, be quiet and like I said, it's gone for better or for worse for me at certain moments. I think there's certain moments I probably should have sat down and been a little quieter, but for the most part, I mean, I don't think I would be in the position that I'm currently in if I hadn't really made it known that I wanted those things. Because
Yeah.
even so I'm at Jezebel in Atlanta. I'm editor in chief. I was like 25 when that happened, which was a huge amount of responsibility. But again, I loved it. So I was throwing myself into it. I wanted to learn as much as I could. And at that time I had one magazine too. So I was really able to focus on the one product at hand. And my boss, kind of really let me just hone in on this one item and do it well. Now I'm stretched a little bit more thinly, which is always challenging. But after being editor in chief, and this is where some of my mom comes in, my mom got diagnosed with leukemia when I was editor in chief there. I was 27 when that happened. And so that instantly was like my gears were shifting. And I told my boss, I have to leave. I can't stay in Atlanta because my mom is ill. And my mom was at our lake house in Indiana when this happened. So they let me work from Indiana while she was undergoing treatment for like 6 months. And I was just under the radar working remotely before working remotely was like the big thing. But from there, I knew I was gonna step away from that role that I had worked really hard for, but I wanted to because this is my mother, like, this is my family, and I told her, I'm like, "You can let me go if you need to, but this is my priority right now." And ultimately, they were really good to me, and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna try to figure out how to transfer you to California," which is where my parents live. So they kind of created a position for me. So that's where, like, the West Coast deputy editor comes in, of working on our LA magazine, Orange County, and San Diego. So I was, like, right under the editor in chiefs, which was what I needed personally at that time because I just couldn't handle carrying a magazine with my mom undergoing cancer treatment. But even after all of that, like, I had to fight to get back to the editor in chief position. And that was in, let's see, my mom got diagnosed in the summer of 2016. I moved back to California the fall of 2016, and then I was back to fighting for the editor in chief position like the winter of 2018. So it was like almost 2 years that I hadn't been in that position. So, but again, like, there were so many people that were in different roles, and it was people leaving and this and that. And, it was a matter of me again, like, going to, at this time, the owners of the company, because my longtime mentor had left at this point,
Mhm.
and really saying, like, okay, I've proven myself in Atlanta. You know what I'm capable of. I know that these publications are a little bit different because the magazines I work for here are geared more towards like the 35 and up crowd versus a younger, 20-year-old crowd. And I was also like 28 telling them this. And they're like, you're going to have to connect with an older crowd, all this stuff, which is maybe where being an only child always,
Yeah.
talking to adults comes in. But yeah, it's always been a fight. I think none of it's ever been handed to me. It's always been me creating that space, and that probably always comes from the support of my parents telling me, like, to go for it and to believe in myself.
When in this, like, process coming back to editor-in-chief, did your mom pass away?
So my mom passed away in May of 2017. So she got diagnosed right around 4th of July 2016 with a very rare kind of leukemia, which is a blood cancer. And my mom was healthy my whole life, like, never had any health issues. She was only 66 when she got diagnosed, and it kind of came out of nowhere. Anyone that's experienced blood cancers can tell you, like, they literally told my mom, like, she drew the short straw. There's nothing that really, like, there are certain things, like, if you've had radiation earlier in your life, they say can be linked to these types of cancers, but in general, it's like a mutation that happens in your body that you can't really do anything about or prepare for or test for. So all of that is to say is that my mom got ill very, very quickly and very rapidly out of nowhere. I mean, this went from like, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to go to the doctor, to I'm starting chemotherapy within like a 3-week range. I mean, it really accelerated very quickly and turned my life upside down
Yeah.
in an instant. So we did treatment for her at Ohio State University because that was kind of the closest big place. And so lived back there that whole fall of 2016 until she could fly back to California. And then we continued treatment here. And anyone that's experienced a loved one having cancer, like, it just destroys your immune system. You're like a baby again. You don't have any sort of defense against even the common cold. So ultimately, my mom passed away from getting pneumonia. And it wasn't even like the cancer, it was all of the things that destroy your body going through cancer. But it was devastating. I mean, it was absolutely the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I think, as I told you prior to this, like, it's hard for me to ever share my story with anyone without talking about my mom because
Mhm.
I would not be where I'm at without her. Like, no way. She always was the person that encouraged me and drove me to the appointments and moved me all over the country. And, she was like, she lived for all this stuff, which is the bittersweet part of me now being back in California is, is, she would have been so happy that I'm finally here doing it, living near her. And I mean,
Yeah.
I share a lot of it with my dad. I take my dad to events and stuff with me, but the ultimate goal in me joining Modern Luxury was that I would eventually be able to do this in California. And I'm grateful that I'm getting to do it. But yeah, it's absolutely shaped me and I miss her terribly all the time.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, I can hear how much she's impacted you in your voice and the way you speak about her. And being a mother now, just the idea of a daughter one day, at any point speaking about her mom with that kind of respect and reverence is so beautiful, And I think that, even though she isn't here physically to see you thriving back in California, I'm sure, she feels you here in California. And I think that's just, I'm sorry you had to experience that at such a young age for her
Thank
and for
you.
you. But I think it's so special to be able to hear these other elements that do play into the person you are, the way you work, the way you go about your life, because we meet people every day and sometimes they're in professional settings or social settings. But there's always other layers of what people are dealing with in their personal lives and private lives. And they're very much informing the way that they work and operate in the world. So thank you for sharing that piece of who you are with our audience because I think it's such an essential thing to be able to connect with. Um,
Definitely.
I'm just looking at the clock and I feel like we could just talk for hours and hours. And I feel so
I
lucky to be
know.
able to have your time. But I'll go ahead and round us out with we usually do like kind of fast 5 questions and a final
Okay.
question before we say goodbye. Number one, we like to ask a lot about morning routines. Do you have like a morning routine that you stick to?
I would say my morning routine is I try to get up and walk and just like be in the sunlight. And that is, I will like time myself for 20 minutes and just walk around the block and like listen to a podcast or just do something to kind of, because my emails are always waiting as they are for all of us.
Yeah.
And I know my days tend to be very deadline driven. So I try to do something in the morning to just sort of like disconnect from that for a moment before I have to dive in and just kind of like do something for myself. So that's when I'm like, I'm going to listen to Taylor Swift for 20 minutes and walk
Love it.
around, or I'm going to like listen to a podcast. So I would say getting that sunlight and just moving, like, even if it's for literally 15 minutes, really helps me. And on the days that I don't do it, I'm always like, "Ugh, I should have
You
gone
feel
out and
it.
done that."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love it.
yeah.
Number two, what is the most unexpected thing about being an editor in chief? Like something that people don't realize is part of your job?
I spend hours and hours going through imagery. Like, that alone is very time consuming. That's probably not the sexiest answer, but it's probably just the amount of research that goes into the job. I think people tend to feel like, and I mean, even if you look at my Instagram, you're probably like, "Oh, she's, like, out at photo shoots and, like, going on trips and all these things." And I always tell people, I'm like, "That is, like, 10% of my job." 90% of my time with my job is spent on my laptop, answering emails, fact checking, putting together lineups, editing stories, writing stories, going through dozens and dozens of photo galleries to select the 3 images we're gonna use.
Hmm.
So I would just say, like, can be a very tedious role. It's a very detail-oriented role, and probably just the hours and amount of research that go into, creating a two-page spread that you can consume in 30 seconds. Like, there was an hour of me going through 400 images to pick those 3 images you see on the page.
I love it.
Um, yeah, so that's a
A
big
lot
part
of
of it.
back end work for
Yes,
sure.
a ton, a ton.
So good. Number three, who is the most like you love the celebrities, who is the most starstruck interaction that you've had in your role? If that is a
Okay, can I have
sentence.
2? Can I have 2?
Yes.
Okay, my 2 are, 1 is Mark Wahlberg, because I interviewed him when I was, like, 22 in a hotel room in Atlanta, which sounds way sketchier than it is, but it was where he was doing a press junket, And that was probably like my first really big celebrity interview. And it was also in person. A lot of the interviews we do are over the phone or even
Mhm.
Zoom. So it was literally just me and Mark Wahlberg and the director of the movie he was promoting and his publicist. And I was terrified. I was so nervous,
Yeah.
but he was the most personable, like kind, nice guy to the point that when my time was up, he like told his publicist to let me keep going and to give me more time. So
So
that
cool.
was like such a special, amazing experience. And then meeting the Backstreet Boys and getting to spend the day with Backstreet Boys, like, as a teeny bopper child was probably, like, one of the best days ever. Like, I was
Yes.
probably in tears for that. So, in Atlanta, the magazine I worked for there, we were part of a radio conglomerate. So they would a lot of times, like, people that would go on the radio to do interviews, they would then send them to our office to play, like, a little mini concert, and they would film that for their websites because we had a really beautiful lounge. So the guy that did these bookings knew that I was writing this celebrity column for the magazine. So anytime a celebrity was coming, he would normally give me a heads up and like try to get me some time with them to just get a few quick, Q&A things. So the day that he told me the Backstreet Boys are coming, I mean, I was like beside myself. I am also a diehard NSYNC girl, but I think just the nostalgia of that for
Totally.
me, like if you had told
Full
me at
circle.
10 years old that I could, like, spend time with, like, Nick Carter and, like, I mean, it was amazing, but we ended up, like, beyond that, they came, they played in our office, which was amazing, and then Brian Luttrell, if anyone is, a Backstreet Boys fan,
Of
he's from
course.
Georgia, so we ended up, I ended up getting to do another feature with him and spending the day with him and his wife, and that was, like, next level. The fangirl in me was just, like, beside herself.
So
So,
good. Great
yeah,
stories.
yeah.
Number 4, what does the perfect day look like for you?
The perfect day for me is a big breakfast. I absolutely love breakfast. Like, anytime my boyfriend and I can go to a really good breakfast or brunch, I'm, like, very happy. It's by far my favorite meal of the day. And then probably, like, just relaxing and, like, being with my friends and family. Like, I don't really need to go do anything crazy. I think I'm grateful for my job and the opportunities that it's given me, and I love the fancy and amazing events I've been able to go to and the trips I've been able to go on. But honestly, if you ask me, like, what I wanna do on a Friday night, I, like, wanna watch Netflix with my boyfriend at home, honestly.
Love it.
It's really, like, the simple things that make me the happiest at the end of the day and where I'm, like, at my most peaceful and content.
I love it. Number 5, what are you most looking forward to, and how can people find you if they wanna connect with you?
What am I most looking forward to? In the immediate, we'll give a nice plug for Vegas magazine here. The new Fontainebleau Las Vegas hotel is opening in 2 weeks, and I'm going out there for the grand opening, and I'm really excited for that. I think it's gonna be amazing. And then, like I said, I also emptied my bank account to buy Adele tickets,
Yeah,
and that's in February, so I'm super excited about that. And then obviously the holidays. And people can follow me on Instagram at allison.mitchell14, or they can email me through my Modern Luxury email, which is amitchell@modernluxury.com.
I love
And
it. And then
that's
we like to end our episodes with the same question, but I'd like to kind of tweak it a little bit for you. If you could tell your mom one thing about your childhood that she did that has really just stuck with you to this day and that you're proud of, what would it be?
I think just how special she always made me feel. Like now you're gonna make me cry. My mom went above and beyond to make me feel loved as a child. And that was like throwing me birthday parties where she literally would get a red carpet and all my friends would dress up as celebrities with me, or like, cutting my sandwiches into certain shapes, for my lunches. Like, my mom made me feel loved every single day, like really above and beyond. And I am so grateful to have had that because I've had some girlfriends that knew my mom and I had a girlfriend one time that I was having a heart to heart with about her, and I was kind of crying, and she started crying, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for making you cry," and she said, "No, I'm crying because, like, I've never had that kind of relationship that, like, you had, and even though you only had it for, 28 years, like, how lucky I am to have had that." So, um, yeah, just, like, she was the best mom. She really made me feel so loved.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Allison. This has been such a treat, and I feel so lucky to have been able to really peel back the layers of, where you came from and who you are today. So thank you for sharing your story with our audience, and we'll
Thank
chat
you.
again soon.
Thank you so much.